but I think people are a little tired of, you know, not being able to do anything.
Yeah,
you
we
know,
all understand that.
except for the fact that thanks to this awful pandemic, Diane has become an expert at Zoom.
There's a lot of new skills out there as a result, right?
Notice who the expert is in our family.
Yes, indeed.
But
I
by the
suspect.
way,
Yeah.
by the way, I want you to know before you get started and everything, your classes are so interesting and informative, and I just love it.
Thank you.
Thank you for
I
having
really enjoy this. Yeah,
Thank you.
I will tell you that I enjoy the teaching for a lot of reasons, but primarily, I guess my rabbi taught me years ago, one of the best parts of teaching is it forces you to study. And it so motivated me that at this point, I've gone back into another master's program in Jewish history. I have no desire for the ultimate degree. And so I'm taking one class at a time because I'm just reading and reading and reading beyond anything they're offering. And the papers are a pain in the neck, but I love the learning.
That's great.
Yeah, it's good stuff.
Yes.
Good stuff. So let's see, what do we have? So I'm going to wait just another couple minutes because we usually have a few more people. So let's see what happens. I will tell you that I'm changing the schedule a bit, and we will get it out. I'm going, instead of the week of January 14th, I'm going to teach during the winter break on the 27th. Excuse me, on the 24th, the day before. Right. I actually have a master's level class that I'm taking the week of the 14th. It's a 1-week class, and so I'm going to be absorbed all week long. So I've just moved it. My instinct is people aren't really doing much the week of the winter breaks anyway. There's not much to do, so most people will be available anyway. On Sunday when I mentioned it, not one person objected.
The 24th is my birthday, so it's an extra special bonus.
We like that. Good.
Very good. A learning day.
And you're 29?
Oh, absolutely. Maybe 39 like Jack Benny.
Yeah, I remember Reagan saying something about being the 40th anniversary of his 39th birthday. All right. So I think what we'll do is we'll get started. Whoever joins us along the way. We left off last week after the Crusades, which take place essentially in the 11th and 12th century, from 1096 until the end of the 1100s. We're going to pick up in the 12th and 13th century at this point with what's going on in the Jewish world beyond the Crusades. It's a time in which life is precarious for both rich and poor. It's a time when babies died before their first birthday of diseases that today we cure easily. Right? And so, and lifespans were shorter on the one hand, but the reality of it is if you made it to your first birthday, your likelihood of living a full life was pretty good. And I know even it's not that long ago, things were different. My great-grandmother had 8 children, and 4 of them died before their first birthday. It was somewhat, I don't want to take away the pain, but it was somewhat unexpected. And that's one of the reasons you had 8 children, all right? Because you want to guarantee your lifespan and your children going on. For those who did survive their childhood, some of them lived past their 50th birthday. But if you read a lot of the writings about, for example, the next couple hundred years, you read about King Henry VIII, you know that they anticipated in their 40s that life was coming to an end. And that was the process. But certainly in the 12th and 13th century, life was incredibly precarious. And so in a world in which you have that fear and anxiety of death hanging over you, pretty much from, your teenagers on, it's easy to blame them, quote them, the people who are not like us, for every tragedy, every hardship, and every loss. Right? Once you know that life is so precarious, you need a reason for that. So you need an other, a them. And during this time, Christians repeatedly made the accusation that the Jews are the devil's children. We read about that. We talked about that last week. And it really comes to the front for at this point. Millions of Christians began to believe that Jews were not actually human beings, but creatures of the devil, allies of Satan, and personifications of the Antichrist. And once you've done that, once you've dehumanized a group, every possible accusation becomes plausible. Nothing is outside the realm of possible. As agents of Satan, the Jews were accused of conspiring to destroy Christianity, and 3 specific anti-Jewish libels were circulated by medieval clergy and then by the majority of Christians. The first is, Jews murder Christians and drink their blood for ritual purposes. That's the first. The second accusation, Jews poison Christians. The third accusation, Jews kidnap the wafer that is transubstantiated into the body of Jesus, and they stick needles into it, thus once again torturing Jesus. So it's the blood libel, it's the poisoning, and it's the kidnapping of the wafer. Those are the 3 fundamental accusations. And each of these was made despite the fact that there was no existence at all about any of these, except when people were tortured, ultimately they confessed. If you torture them long enough, they'll confess to anything. Right? They had no other proof. All right. In the absence of evidence, few Christians were fooled by reality. Once you have a belief, you don't need evidence to support it. Okay. So let's begin with the ritual murders, and let's go back to the very early stages. It's based on it started out with an incident in the 12th century. Yes, indeed. On Good Friday in 1144, a forester stumbles upon a corpse of a young boy named William in the woods outside of Norwich, England. Okay, 1144, Norwich, England. According to a book written years later by a monk and chronicler known as Thomas of Monmouth, and we'll come back to his name a few times. Here's what we have. We have reading number 1. So, Bob, do you have just by show of hands, who has the text in front of them? So I know to call on you. All right, Karen, Bob, nobody else?
I've got it.
Okay, Marsha. Okay.
Okay.
So, Bob, would you do the first reading here? Reading number 1. This is by Thomas of Monmouth.
Becoming aware that the boy had been treated with unusual cruelty, the forester now began to suspect from the manner of his treatment that it was no Christian, but in very truth a Jew who had killed an innocent child of this kind with such horrible barbarity.
Okay. So I'm going to ask people to mute if they're not reading, because we can hear sort of the conversations going on behind you. All right. So Al, can you also mute?
Me? I'm just downloading it now.
Okay, but no, can you mute? Hit the mute button, because there's background sounds. Okay, I think I can do it. Hold on. There we go. Okay. All right. So William's relatives agree with the forester. They agree that it must be a Jew. No Christian could be engaged in such kind of behavior. And her uncle describes, his uncle describes a dream in which his wife had a few weeks ago, in which a Jew attacked her in the marketplace and tore off one of her legs. And the couple now interprets that dream as a warning that she would lose a loved one because of the Jews. Now, you need to know, in 1144, when this event happened, most of the people in Norwich ignored these charges or attributed them to the grief of a lost one. Okay? Not an unusual thing. After all, Jews had been living in the city for 100 years and nothing like this had ever happened before. William is buried, and life in Norwich continues as usual until about 1149, 5 years later, when Thomas of Monmouth comes to live in a monastery in Norwich. He becomes obsessed with the murder, and he's quickly convinced that William was not a victim of random violence, but a martyr who died for his faith. And he writes a book about William's death, hoping to have the boy declared a saint. He bases his book on stories by 4 people. He interviews people and he gets 4 stories, and I'm going to share with you what they are. The first was a deathbed confession by Aylward Dead, one of the richest men in Norwich. He's on his deathbed. He tells a priest that he had seen a Jew named Eleazar and another man walking with a horse early on the day that William's body was discovered. On the horse was a huge sack, which Aylward touched, and he thought there was a human body in the sack. All right, that's story 1. Story 2, William's aunt, the one who had the dream, now comes forward to say that William had come to see her on the day of his disappearance. With him was a cook who had offered the boy a job. Suspicious of the cook, the aunt asked her daughter to follow them when they left. And the little girl comes back and tells her that William and the cook entered Eleazar's house and the door closed behind them. Okay, story 3. Thomas then found a witness, this time a Christian woman who in 1144 had worked as a servant for Eleazar the cook. She claimed that on the day William disappeared, Eleazar had ordered her to bring him a pot of boiling water. And when he carried the pot of boiling water into another room, she peeked into the room and she sees a boy tied up. Those are 3 stories. The 4th, which is just fascinating, comes from Theobald, another monk who was nowhere near Norwich in 1144, not at all. Theobald had been born a Jew and converts to Christianity, as he claims, because of William's martyrdom. And he then makes the following claim: every Jew knows in England in 1144 that a boy would be killed in Norwich on Good Friday. According to Theobald, prominent Jews gather every year in Spain just before Passover, each year to determine where a Christian child would be sacrificed. Jews who lived in the selected country, they pick a country, and this year it's England, drew lots to decide exactly where the crime would take place. In 1144, England was the country selected, and Norwich was the town. That's what Jews do together every year. It didn't strike Thomas of Monmouth as surprising at all, the fact that no one else had ever made this claim. All right, you got one person making the risk. According to Theobald, I'm just letting somebody in, Jews were willing to risk their lives through such an action to show their utter contempt for Christianity and to take revenge for the exile from their homeland. And then Thomas adds his own twist to the faith, to the tale. He insists that Jews do more than just kill their victims. They reenact the crucifixion of Jesus. All right. And in his book, he does reading number 2. And so let's see, Karen, would you read reading number 2? We can, yeah. You need to, there you
I
go.
thought I was going to do some smart unmuting, but instead I screwed up my whole reading page. Hang on. Okay, reading number 2. The Jews laid their blood-stained hands upon the innocent victim, and having lifted him from the ground and having fastened him upon the cross, they vied with one another in their efforts to make an end of him. In doing these things, they were adding pang to pang and wound to wound, and yet were not able to satisfy their heartless cruelty and their inborn hatred of the Christian's name. Lo, after these many and great tortures, they inflicted a frightful wound in his left side, reaching even to his heart, and as though to make an end of all, they extinguished his mortal life so far as it was in their power. And since many streams of blood were running down from all parts of his body, then, to stop the blood and to wash and close the wounds, they poured boiling water over him.
Now, mind you, this is being written years and years later. There are no real eyewitnesses to any of this, and there's no way to refute it. Okay? In the 12th century, accusations of ritual murder did not seem outrageous to people. Again, remember, they've made the association of Jew and devil. Instead of being a surprise to them, it just seemed to confirm what they already believed about Jews and Judaism. When William died, the Crusades had been going on for 50 years already, and there'd been speeches and sermons that persuaded people to join the Crusaders' armies, and they blamed the Jews and the Muslims for the loss of Jerusalem, as we talked about last week, and any attack on Christians or their beliefs. So it's following up on a period of utter attacks on Jewish integrity. Whatever the motives were, the story that Thomas of Monmouth told about William's murder spread like wildfire. It reinforced the images that had been proposed from the pulpit. And people who hated Christians, it was clear they would stop at nothing. This is not the last accusation of ritual murder made against the Jews. In 1147, in Würzburg, Germany, the Jews were accused of murdering a Christian. 1168, similar charges were made in England, and a few years later in Paris. The Jews of Blois, a town in France, were among those who specifically accused of a ritual murder in particular. On a spring day in 1171, a Jewish tanner was walking along the banks of the Loire River. He was carrying a bundle of raw animal hides when he encounters the servant of a town official. As the two men pass one another, one of the animal skins drops out of the tanner's bundle into the river. The servant immediately assumes it's a corpse, and he runs to tell his master. The Count of Blois accepted the story as fact and imprisoned all the Jews in town and ordered that their children be baptized as Christians. So all that had to happen here was an animal skin fall into the water, someone make a wrong assumption, all the adults are arrested, and all the children are converted. May of that year, the Jews who had been imprisoned were given a choice: conversion or death. 8 or 9 people chose to be baptized. The rest were herded into a hut and burned alive. Now, not everyone in this time, and here again, you're going to see the constant distinction between leadership and the mobs. Okay? Not everyone believed these rumors. When the Jews appealed to the Count of Champagne, who was the brother of the Count of Blois, who imprisoned everyone, the Count of Champagne responded by saying publicly, "We find nowhere in Jewish law that it is permissible to kill a Christian." When charges of ritual murder were made in the lands that the Count of Champagne ruled over, he did nothing to act on the charges. So it's not universal. That's the story of William. There's one that's even more powerful and has even a greater effect, and that's the death of little Hugh, H-U-G-H. By the end of the 12th century, Christians in 8 cities had accused Jews of ritual murder. By the end of the 13th century, it was more than 25. As the accusations spread, so did the false belief that Jews routinely engage in the practice of ritual murder. This accusation, when someone repeats an accusation over and over and over, it doesn't have to be true. It can be illogical. When people assume where there is smoke, there is fire. Truth is not required. In 1255, a 5-year-old boy was found dead in a well in Lincoln, England. The Christians in Lincoln were absolutely convinced that the Jews had murdered him and thrown his body into the well. And they immediately charged an individual Jew, somebody by the name of Kopin, who lived nearby. They torture him until he does confess to ritual murder. And once he does, they arrest all the Jews in town. Like William of Norwich, young Hugh ultimately is turned into a saint. And his story, like William's, is embellished with each telling. As a matter of fact, that story is later set to music, and scholars have identified more than 21 versions of a ballad about his death. As a matter of fact, even further, in the 1300s, decades after the expulsion of Jews from England, you may have heard of Chaucer. You may have heard of the Canterbury Tales. One of the stories in the Canterbury Tales is about little Hugh. I remember being a teenager and being assigned this book and coming across this text as a teenager and not having any idea what to do with it. Okay? It made it into some of our finest literatures, what that says. So ritual murder, issue number 1. Any comments or questions? Yes, Sandra.
So I'm sorry I was late, but is this beyond Europe? Is it also in Moorish countries or just Christians?
No, it's at this point, it's primarily happening in the north, in the Christian countries. But I will go in next week. My intent is to shift south and start with Muslims. But right now I'm focusing. But the accusations, these accusations are primarily Christian and North. The anti-Semitism of the Muslim world is different.
But it included the Mediterranean, Italy, Spain.
Yes.
But didn't go to Turkey and Ottoman Empire, those things.
It spreads there, but it's not in this early stage. Yes. Okay. Yes. Okay. So the second of the accusations, unless there are other questions, is the blood libel. Okay. 20 years before Hugh's death, a new element had been added to the charge of ritual murder. They were now accused of murdering Christian children for their blood. Like other charges of ritual murder, the blood libel is a lie that led to the death of countless numbers of Jews over the centuries. In the 13th century, most people in Europe, particularly Northern Europe, believed that blood had enormous power. By the way, Christians and Jews alike believed that the soul was contained in the blood. It's biblical in sorts. We're told not to eat the blood of animals because that's where life can be found. And as a result, just an aside here, Jews have been forbidden to eat blood. All right. We drain the blood. I have all these images. Growing up with my mom in the kosher butchers and making sure that whether you get kosher meat, it's been drained already. You had to make sure if you got liver, you had to broil it so that you got all the rest of the blood out of it. I learned, and I do the same thing from her, that when you make eggs, you never put all the eggs into your recipe. One at a time, you break it into a glass. You look for a blood spot. If there's a blood spot, you dispose of the egg. And this way you don't ruin your entire recipe. You only have to dispose of one egg at a time. I still do that. That's the way the Orthodox Jews do. I learned that from my mom. Okay? Jews who come into contact with blood are in a state of tameh, meaning that when you use the word impure, all that means is that you're not in a place or a state to be able to engage in rituals and mitzvot. Your goal is to purify yourself through washing of the hands so that you can repurify yourself. So contact with blood makes one ineligible to engage in other mitzvot. There's a power to blood, and certainly that is what they believed in the ancient world. Despite the fact that that's what Jews believe, on Christmas Day in 1235, Jews in a town of Fulda, Germany, were accused of murdering 5 Jewish children for their blood. a miller and his wife returned home from church to find that their home had been burnt down and their 5 children had been inside and all died. They and their neighbors immediately accused the Jews of the crime. Horrified, the townspeople placed the children's body in a cart and carried those bodies to the Emperor Frederick II as evidence. Now, you need to know this is in a world in which people rarely ventured out of their own little towns. Travel was dangerous. Besides the criminals and everything outside of the towns where rules didn't apply, all right, you had wildlife, you had all sorts of things that were dangerous. And so you rarely traveled very far out of your town. Nonetheless, they take these bodies 150 miles on a walk, telling their story to everyone along the way who will listen. They reach Frederick, the emperor, and he doesn't know what to think of these accusations. So he sends messengers to other European rulers asking for their advice, as well as sending for recent converts to Christianity to get more information. And in 1236, he issues an edict which summarizes what he learned from his advisors, and that's reading number 3. Who else has the text? All right, Marcia, you have it? And then Sandra and Alan, Alan, you have it. Okay, Marcia, would you read number 3?
Sure. It is clear that it was not indicated in the Old Testament or in the New that Jews lust for the drinking, of human blood. Rather, precisely the opposite. They guard against the intake of all blood, as we find expressly in the biblical book of Genesis, in the laws given by Moses, and in the Jewish decrees of the Talmud. We can surely assume that for those to whom even the blood of permitted animals is forbidden, the desire for human blood cannot exist. Moreover, they would not expose to danger their substance and persons for that which they might have freely taken from animals. By this sentence of the princes, we pronounce the Jews of the aforesaid place and the rest of the Jews of Germany completely absolved of this imputed crime.
Okay, is there a lawyer in the room? Okay, all right. My question would be a counselor. So how do you read the verdict? The verdict is they're not guilty. So that's the verdict given out by one of the leaders. Nonetheless, you've got mob rule. So despite the emperor's orders, the accusations continue. In March of 1247, about 10 years later, 2 Franciscans accused the Jews of Valray in France of crucifying a Christian children and using his blood for ritual purposes. Some Jews are tortured, many others are killed. The survivors of that event then turn not to the emperor, but to the Pope, Pope Innocent IV. All right. And he condemns such accusations against the Jews in strong language, as does his successor, Gregory X, who in 1271 issues the following statement. Okay, Sandra, would you read reading number 4?
Yes. Since it happens occasionally that some Christians lose their Christian children, the Jews are accused by their enemies of secretly carrying off and killing these same Christian children and making sacrifices of the heart and blood of these very children. It happens too that the parents of these children or some other Christian enemies of these Jews secretly hide these very children in order that they may be able to injure these Jews, and in order that they may be able to extort from them a certain amount of money by redeeming them from their straits. And most falsely do these Christian claims that the Jews have secretly and furtively carried away these children and killed them, and that the Jews offer sacrifice from the heart and blood of these children, since their law in this matter precisely and expressly forbids Jews to sacrifice, eat, or drink the blood, or to eat the flesh of animals having claws. This has been demonstrated many times at our courts by Jews converted to the Christian faith. Nevertheless, very many Jews are often seized and detained unjustly because of this. We decree, therefore, that Christians need not be obeyed against Jews in a case or situation of this type. And we order that Jews seized under such a silly pretext be freed from imprisonment, and they shall not be arrested henceforth on such a miserable pretext, unless, which we do not believe, they be caught in the commission of the crime. We decree that no Christian shall stir up anything new against them, that they should be maintained in that status and position in which they were in the time of our predecessors from antiquity till now.
Okay, so you have the ruling in 1236 of a civic leader, the emperor. You have this statement put out by the Pope in 1271, a religious leader. That one would think would be sufficient. You know how it plays out. So Gregory's statement suggests, the Pope's statement suggests some of the reasons that these accusations were readily believed. And again, as I described earlier, children are dying. It's a time in which the vulnerable die easily. And what one does not want, what the Christian people in general don't want, is to have no reason for it. All right? One of the things we say when somebody dies is Dayan ha'emet. God is a true judge. It's a statement of we don't understand it, but it's also a way of saying we don't blame God directly. And so one of the ways in which you can avoid blame of God is to find someone else who is the cause. That's one. Number two is perhaps this family did something in leaving their 5 kids in a home and left some kind of candles burning. They certainly don't want to be responsible for what happened. I need to have an other who is responsible. So you see, it enables one to grab a sense of meaning, and because if you have a reason for what happened. Gregory mentions Christian enemies of Jews who falsely claim that their children were dead in order to have Jews arrested or executed or to demand money from them in finding their children. If I've taken a loan, Jews are the only ones able to give a loan. If I owe money to a Jew and I can have him killed or arrested, I don't have to pay my loan back. It's economic as well. Now I've got a really bizarre sort of sidestep with this. This is bizarre. And Dr. Winters, I'm going to ask you for your input at the end. I say that somewhat tongue in cheek, but all right. So among the more outlandish assumptions that played out with this idea of blood was that Jewish men menstruated and therefore required Christian blood to replenish themselves, or alternatively that they needed to make up for the blood lost through circumcision. Okay, let's play a little bit with this. This is some research I actually have done in the last 2 weeks, so it's new. There is a statement in Matthew, in the book of Matthew, chapter 27. It says, "His blood be upon us and our children at the crucifixion, because they have become unwarlike and weak like women, which is why every lunar month they suffer, as is said, a flux of blood." This is attributed to Jews. Okay. In support of his claim, Jacques cites a modified version of Psalm 77, in which he says, again, it's modified, "God smote them in the hinder parts and laid upon them a perpetual reproach." The reference to this flux of blood every month represents the nucleus of this bizarre accusation of male menstruation. So let's look at this development a little bit. The notion that men menstruated is first and foremost rooted in the concept of divine punishment for the crucifixion of Jesus. That's its source. It also clearly reflects in the allegation that the Jews suffered their bleeding not monthly, but annually, by some were making this, on the anniversary of Christ's death. So the association, where does this come from? It's a response to the crucifixion of Jesus. Then there started to be science, okay? And again, medieval science is not modern science, okay? They used Greek and Arabic sources at universities during the 13th century, and the myth began to establish itself that no longer was satisfied with merely supernatural punishment, but rather it is the blood that's occurring is from the scientific perspective of the time, is from bleeding hemorrhoids caused by an abundance of gross ingested blood. This would explain for them, as they understood it, the melancholic nature of Jews who hate society, who have a pallid complexion, and are naturally timid. Of course, if you kill and murder them, they're going to be a little more timid than they might be otherwise, but facts don't get in the way. In addition, this abundance of melancholic blood is said to be produced. How? One, because Jews, their nutrition is inappropriate. This kosher eating is not good for them. Two, they abstain from wine. Therefore, they have issues. And three, and I love this one, if only they would engage in bloodletting, they wouldn't have this problem. All right? So the cause is clear. Menstruation and hemorrhoids are both described by medieval psychologists as having a similar functional purpose. And that is the purging of blood from a surplus blood from the body. And therefore, it's just a small leap from hemorrhoids to menstruation. So, doctor, may I ask you your opinion of this? I say somewhat tongue-in-cheek. All right. Let me go back to where I was. Okay. Give me 1 second here. Let me look at the page. Oh, here we go. Sorry. Okay. Despite all the absurdities of what was being described, the accusations of the blood libel takes on a life of its own. In the 19th century, now we're only talking about 200 years ago, one of the leading essayists in England, Charles Lamb, wrote, "I confess that I do not have the nerve to enter the synagogues. Old prejudices cling about me. I cannot shake off the story of you of Lincoln." In 1973, now we're talking about 50 years ago, a book of Ozark Mountain folk songs was printed, which included a ballad about the Jewish ritual murder of you of Lincoln. In it, a Jewish woman is described as inviting a young Christian boy into her house, whereupon, reading number 5, let's see, who hasn't read yet? Okay, is everybody who has the reading read? Okay, then let's go back to Bob.
She pinned a napkin. Oh, here we are.
Yeah.
She pinned a napkin o'er her face and pinned it with a gold pin, then called for a vessel of gold to catch his heart blood in, to catch his heart blood in. May I say, some of the purging of blood certainly is consistent with some of the thought of Canterbury Tales and Chaucer and the humors in terms of their effect on the human body. And you know, I think that kind of thought, it didn't come out of a vacuum. It came out of the thinking of the 12th, 13th century.
Yeah, it was them. It was their science of the time.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we're looking at this. This was written 50 years ago. This is written post the 1960s. This is written post the beginning of the women's movement. This is written post the movement to give equal rights to blacks and to spread all of the good stuff of a society that welcomes people into it. This is written after those events. It has a life of its own. An interesting comment is that the blood libel, particularly the men's menstruation, but the blood libel in general, may actually have strengthened Jewish identity in an unexpected manner. The early Zionist Achad Ha'am in 1896 contended that the blood libel was actually of some psychological benefit to the Jews in that it helped them resist the internalization of the world's negative portrayal of them. And that's reading number 6. Okay, so Marcia, would you read reading number 6? And I think I see you're unmuted.
Yeah, I'm good. This accusation is the solitary case in which the general acceptance of an idea about ourselves does not make us doubt whether all the world can be wrong, and we right, because it is based on an absolute lie.
Okay, if you read, I'm actually working on a paper right now, and you read about the Holocaust. One of the things that occurred during the Holocaust is that Jews began to accept the negative portrayal of the society around them. It's hard, even when you are bombarded with this constant negativity, not to begin to question yourself. What Achad Ha'am is saying, these accusations are so bizarre. Men menstruating. Jews know this is not happening. So when it's clear that the accusation has no validity whatsoever, it actually serves to strengthen identity and help people refute the accusations that are being made. Very interesting comment by Achad Ha'am. Comments or questions? Okay. The third accusation, the desecration of the host. In the 13th century, a new and even stranger accusation is this desecration. In 1215, you had the Fourth Lateran Council, and by the Catholic Church, and they accept at this council a number of things. One of them is the doctrine of transubstantiation, that what happens is as the wafer that is used at the Mass is blessed and miraculously transformed into the body of Jesus. It's not symbolic, as the Protestants later claim. From the Catholic perspective, it is literally the body of Jesus. Okay? And shortly after this declaration, at the Easter Passover time, some of the Christians then turn around and accuse Jews of desecrating the host. Gregory mentions, these charges then lead to the killing of Jews as a result. So Jesus becomes present in the wafer. The reasoning goes, why would the Jews who killed Jesus once not want to torture and kill him again? That's the logic going on here. In 1243, only 28 years after the Fourth Lateran Council, the first accusation of the host desecration occurs near Berlin. The city's entire Jewish community is burned alive for torturing a wafer, allegedly. In Prague, in 1389, about 150 years later, the Jewish community was collectively accused of attacking a monk carrying a wafer. Large mobs of Christians surround the Jewish neighborhood and offer the Jews the choice of baptism or death. In 1510, 26 Jews were burned and 2 beheaded for reportedly desecrating the host. This is I don't know how you could possibly defend yourself against such a charge. It's not until the rise of Protestantism that this superstition seems to cease. Okay? Nonetheless, despite that ceasing, in 1836, it was still being made in Romania. Okay? It has a life. I want to go back to poisoning Christians. That actually was the second of the arguments. Going back to poisoning Christians. If a king had a Jewish physician and the king didn't perish on the battlefield, which was often the case, there is nothing surprising then about his unfortunate doctor being accused of poisoning him later. In actuality, almost every medieval Jewish doctor in Europe was endangered. It's a good time to be a doctor today. It's not a good time to be a doctor in those days. In 1161 in Bohemia, 86 Jews are burned as punishment for an alleged plot of Jewish physicians to poison the populace. In 1610, now we're talking much later, the medical faculty at the University of Vienna declared that the Jewish physicians were bound by Jewish law to kill every 10th Christian through the use of drugs. Martin Luther, in that same period, says that if they, the Jews, could kill us all, they would gladly do so, and often do it, especially those who profess to be physicians. They know all that is known about medicine in Germany. They can give poison to a man of which he will die in an hour or in 10 or 20 years, for so thoroughly they understand the art. Now go defend yourself against the belief that someone has the ability to poison you in a way in which over the next 20 years they'll die. Because the likelihood in that world is over the next 20 years, they are going to die. It takes on a particular tragic outcome with the coming of the Black Death. Okay, and we'll begin next week's lesson talking about that a little bit. So Jews are increasingly being seen through these libels as a powerful threat to Christianity. All right. One of the reasons is until this 10th century, and this I think you'll find interesting, Judaism encouraged outsiders to convert. All right. Judaism was a religion that proselytized. It is only when in the 10th century it became a ruling by the Christian society that those who engage in conversion to Judaism, not only will the convert be killed, but the person who conducts the conversion will be killed. You can imagine why Jews would stop being proselytizers. It wasn't a survival technique. And as recently as I think in the last 10 or 20 years, I've begun to see articles in some of the Reformed journals that we should be returning to proselytization, that we should be actively seeking converts. Okay, that has not been the Jewish way for the last millennium. As I mentioned to you, in 1215, Pope Innocent calls together 400 bishops for the Fourth Lateran Council. In addition to the issue of transubstantiation, the council issues 70 edicts in an effort to unify Christianity and to stamp out heresies which were considered a threat to the church. Number one, Jews are not to hold public office, since that gives them a pretext to vent their wrath against Christians. Keep them out of office. Another deals, and this is what I was just talking about, with Jews who converted to Christianity. Church leaders were to keep those those Christians from returning to Judaism. And the final edict in there is reading number 7. Okay, so Karen, would you read reading number 7?
In some provinces, a difference in dress distinguishes the Jews or Muslims from the Christians, but in certain others, such a confusion has grown up that they cannot be distinguished by any difference. Thus it happens at times that through error, Christians have relations with the women of Jews or Muslims, and Jews and Muslims with Christian women. Therefore, that they may not, under pretext of error of this sort, excuse themselves in the future for the excesses of such prohibited intercourse, we decree that such Jews and Muslims of both sexes in every Christian province and at all times shall be marked off in the eyes of the public from other peoples through the character of their dress. Moreover, during the last 3 days before Easter, and especially on Good Friday, Jews should not go forth in public at all, for the reason that some of them on these very days, as we hear, do not blush to go forth better dressed, and are not afraid to mock the Christians who maintain the memory of the most holy passion by wearing signs of mourning. This, however, we forbid most severely, that anyone should presume at all to break forth an insult to the Redeemer. And since we ought not to ignore any insult to him who blotted out our disgraceful deeds, we command that such impudent fellows be checked by the secular princes by imposing on them proper punishment so that they not at all presume to blaspheme him who was crucified for us.
Okay. By the end of the 13th century, most European Jews were forced to wear badges or distinguishing clothing. The aim was to humiliate them, to set them apart from the neighbors, but the effect is twofold. The image of the Jew as a threat to Christianity is reinforced by setting them apart, as well as the fact that once they're easier to identify, they're also more vulnerable to attacks. All right? Walking around with a kippah in America makes you more vulnerable when you're more easily identified. I certainly have had my share of experiences in my life. So we have limited time, and there's just so much. I'm going to skip over the section on the debates, but I want to say to you that the word debate is really a misnomer. It's really a dispute. It's a disputation of Judaism. This is not a debate where two sides bring to the table two arguments and let's see what the outcome is. This is the Barcelona debate. All of the debates really are the Jewish representative is warned in advance to be very careful. Should he make a point that's anti-Christian, he and his family might be put to death. That's not an example of a debate. Okay? So the word debate is really a very poor word. It's really a disputation. I'm going to go on from there to the expulsions. As we've talked about, the first crusade led to a century of accusations, the blood libel, etc., and many Jews in France in particular are burned and attacked. Immediately after the coronation of Philip Augustus in March of 1181, the king orders the Jews arrested on a Saturday in all their synagogues and despoiled of their money and their investments. Now, I've hinted at the economic underpinnings, and here you're going to see it start to play out. In the following April of 1182, he publishes an edict of expulsion and gives the Jews a delay of 3 months for the sale of their property. Immovable property, however, such as houses, fields, vines, barns, wine presses, he confiscates. The Jews attempted to win over the nobles, but they were unsuccessful. In July, he compels them to leave the royal domains of France. Their synagogues are converted into churches, and his successive measures are simply tools to fill the royal coffers. The goods that are confiscated are then sold for cash. That's one. 16 years later, in July of 1198, Philip Augustus recalls the Jews to Paris. This is not because of a goodwill to the Jews. He knows, now he's already gotten all their property and sold all that. He knows they're very good at trade. And if you're good at trade, people make income off of the taxes of the trades. If you extend loans, you get profits on the loans. And so he recalls them and gives them state sanction so that they can engage in banking and pawnbroking. He places everything they do under state control with a legal rate of interest, and everything that needs their state approval has a tax associated with it. 1234, 35 years later, in Louis the Ninth sees all these loans that the Jews have with the Christians and says, you know what, Christians, 1/3 of all your loans you're now free of. All right, you only have to pay back 2/3 on the dollar. All right, you had a specified time. It's also forbidden to imprison any Christian who owes a debt. All right, and they cannot sell their real estate to Jews. What the king is wishing to do after inviting all the Jews in 35 years later and saying to them, make loans, get involved in banking, is now to get rid of usury. 9 years later, he orders at the Pope's urging the burning in Paris of 12,000 manuscripts of the Talmud. In order to finance his first crusade, he then again orders the expulsion of all Jews engaged in usury and the confiscation of all their property. It's a repeated pattern. It's economic. Happens again, 1306. The Jews are welcomed back, 1306. The treasury is nearly empty. The French treasury is nearly empty. The king decides to kill the goose that lays the golden egg, finally. He condemns the Jews to banishment and forcibly takes possession of all their property, real and personal. Now he's going after everything. The houses, the lands, the movable goods are sold at auction, and the king takes any treasures found amongst the Jews into his belonging. Ironically, what is the name of that king that's doing this? Philip the Fair. He's merely filling the gap in his treasury. He's not concerned with the well-being of his subjects, neither Jews or Christians. All right. He sees this as an opportunity to make money. And in 1394 is the final expulsion. All right. After 1394, you see no further Jews in France for a period of time. By the way, the tradition holds that it happened on Tisha B'Av. A lot of these events are traditionally attributed to Tisha B'Av. England also. Medieval England is particularly anti-Jewish. Jews hate Jesus. They're accused of ritual murder throughout England and Scotland and Wales. And riots emerge as Jews are murdered, most famously in 1190, when hundreds of Jews are massacred in the city of York. And the situation only gets worse for the Jews as they go into the 13th century. In 1218, England becomes the first European nation to require Jews to wear a badge. Taxation grows increasingly worse. Between 1219 and 1272, 49 levies are imposed on the Jews. Now, this is assume you're paying your taxes. This is above and beyond a special Jew tax. The first major step towards expulsion took place in 1275 with the Statute of Jewry. It outlaws all usury and gives Jews 15 years to readjust to that limitation on their economics. Okay, now mind you, they're not allowed to do anything else. By 1289, King Edward, we saw this in France, King Edward is in debt. And the next summer, he summons his knights together to impose a nationwide tax. But to make the tax more palatable to the larger population, he offers to expel the Jews. That's his trade-off. The heavy tax is passed, and 3 days later, on July 18th, the Edict of Expulsion is issued. And it's widely popular. It meets with little resistance. It's carried out quickly. It goes smoothly, although there are some horrific stories, and I'll share just one. One story tells of a captain taking a ship full of Jews to the Thames at a time in which the tide was going out, and he convinces them at that point to get off the boat and then walk on the land that's where the tide has gone out, go for a walk with him. He manages to lose them. He gets back on his ship before the tide and leaves them all to drown. Once this expulsion in England happens in 1290, the final expulsion, France is 1394, England is 1290, there essentially are no significant Jewish presence. There's no Jewish significant presence until their formal return in 1655. Now, somebody asked the question earlier, this doesn't really deal with Spain, and I'm going to get into Northern Europe at this point is Christian, Southern Europe is Muslim, and next week we will begin to look at the Muslim experience of the Jews. I also want to reiterate something I said before everybody was here, And that is that I've made a switch in one of the weeks, and I'll get out a new calendar. The week of January 10th to 14th, I will be away taking a class myself. And so I'm going to teach, instead of that week, I'm going to teach it the week of December 24th. I have to imagine most people will be available this year. There's not much going on. And so I'm going to teach that session on December 24th instead of January 14th. After the 24th, we'll take a couple of weeks off and come back on the 21st. Any questions, comments, thoughts?
I have a
Besides
question
the fact
about,
that it's depressing.
I have a
yeah.
question about reading 8. I know we don't have time to get to it.
Yeah.
What country is that from? Is that from England?
Let me look, hold on one second.
Sure.
Reading 8, I'm gonna find it in my notes.
Yes, France, I think.
Reading 8, and it's France.
It is France? Okay.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Thank you.
Okay.
Mentioned in the text.
Yes, Sandra.
Yeah, I think I misheard something. I just want to check it out. You said that the Jews were expelled when from England and they returned in 1655 to Northern Europe, including
1290.
England? Or
1290 to 1655. 1394 from France. 1492.
and they didn't return to any of those countries till 1655?
No, that specifically is England. There was a return to France. Kept welcoming them back, but it wasn't this time. It wasn't every 20 years. It took a while.
Okay.
Was it Cromwell that got him back, actually?
I'm not sure.
We'll find out. Okay.
Okay. Anyone else? All right. Join us the next couple of nights. We'll be lighting Hanukkah candles together as a community.
Thank
Happy
you very
Hanukkah,
much.
everyone. May it be a point of rededication in all our lives. May the lights infuse us with illumination.
Thank you. Amen.
Thank you.
Oxamea.
God Sameach. Bye-bye.
Bye.